In Myanmar, the battle for the border town of Myawaddy has raged for the past 3 weeks. Rebels and the military are fighting for control of the area near Thailand. In the first of 4 special reports, Al Jazeera's Tony Cheng has travelled to the front lines in Kayin state, and he's spoken to one of the rebel commanders.
Fighters from the pro-democracy People's Defence Force take defensive positions. This is the main road between the Thai border and Yangon, Myanmar's commercial hub. The town levelled by bombs from the military junta, or SAC, State Administration Council. Civilians long gone, their cattle roam freely in the streets, but even they know not to go too far. Beyond the barrier is no man's land. This is the Asian highway between Kokorek and Myawaddy, an area that the SAC have been pushed out of, but it's still not completely under control of the pro-democracy forces. And there are fighter jets in the air, so they're being very careful about exposing themselves here. The battle along the Asian highway has been fierce. Relief columns of military reinforcements, a force of 2,000 men, have tried to break through to the border. Most have been stopped, say the fighters, but some did slip through. And a constant threat from the air, that even their heaviest weapons can do little to repel. The man in charge of PDF operations says his greatest concern isn't the military junta, but unity within the opposition.
We are not afraid of their weapons. We fear only one thing apart from artillery or airstrikes, and that is division. We do not care about any of their powerful weapons. My only fear is that we will not be united.
But the alliance between the Karen ethnic army and the pro-democracy forces is holding well. PDF fighters under Karen command travel freely through the countryside. Logging tracks turned into supply chain highways, hidden under the jungle canopy. They've taken casualties. This funeral for fighters killed in drone attacks, a new weapon the military's deployed.
I'm sad whenever our comrades die, but we are mentally prepared for sacrifices and casualties. Sometimes I think about quitting the fight, but I don't want my comrades to have died for nothing. So I keep fighting until the revolution succeeds.
Buddhist monks chant prayers for the dead, the last rites. Rebels who died for a cause, and a victory they now won't taste. Tony Cheng, Al Jazeera, Kayin State, Myanmar.
In the second of our special reports from inside Myanmar, Tony Cheng is going to examine the impact that fighting's had on civilians as millions across the country are forced from their homes. That's on Monday here on Al Jazeera. Well, Tony's joining us live from Bangkok, outside the Myanmar embassy. Describe to us how similar the conflict in Kayin State is to what's happening elsewhere in Myanmar.
Well, in some ways, it's very symptomatic of the situation all across the country, well, particularly along the borders, where you have the ethnic armies who've been joined by these pro-democracy fighters, many of whom are young people from the big cities like Yangon and Mandalay, very committed to getting the military out and getting back to a democratic system. And they've been very effective at pushing the military away from their border positions. They've now lost control of much of the border with China, with India, with Bangladesh and Thailand. But there are also complications, particularly in Myawaddy, that they're not facing elsewhere. As the commander of the Southern PDF mentioned in that piece, the thing they're really concerned about in this area is the relationship between the ethnic army and the PDF fighters who've come from mainland Myanmar. That's something traditionally that has been very problematic in Myanmar. I was talking to a friend in Yangon recently who said that for most Burmese, the Karen question is the most complicated one, because the Karen have been fighting a war of independence and autonomy for 70 years, and now they're being asked to ally with people from other parts of Myanmar to fight the military. Now, at the moment, that fight is holding. They're doing very well. They control most of the countryside. I think the real concern is that once they've got the military out, who's going to be left in control? And that's something that people are starting to turn their minds to now.
Tony, thank you very much indeed. That's Tony Cheng talking to us from Bangkok, outside the Myanmar embassy. Well, Myanmar's military has been fighting on multiple fronts since seizing power, as Tony was describing, in 2021. But in the last few months, rebel groups have launched renewed offensives and captured huge amounts of territory. As Tony's been mentioning, rebels have gained significant ground in the east, including critical border areas of Kayin State, one of Myanmar's most important trade links with Thailand. Fighters and popular defence groups have also launched major operations in the north and the west, taking control of large parts of Rakhine and Shan states and disrupting a key trade route with China. The resistance now controls more than half of Myanmar. The junta's forces are stretched thin. Each week, troops abandon more outposts and retreat into the central region, where fighting is nearing the capital. Well, Ronan Lee is a Leverhulme Trust Early Career Fellow at Loughborough University in London. He's focusing on Asian politics and Myanmar. He's joining us now live from London. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. One of the things that has struck me, given the fact that particularly the military junta has the benefit, in inverted commas, of air power and fighter jets, how much of a surprise is it that the rebels and those opposed to the junta have been able to take control of so much of the country?
Well, it's a factor of how unpopular the Myanmar military junta is with the people of Myanmar. I mean, that's why resistance groups have been so successful. This is a popular resistance. This isn't a resistance that's been imposed from outside or anything like that. This is a reflection of the will of the people of Myanmar. So it's the will of the majority Buddhist community. It's also the will of minority groups among ethnic and religious minorities. Now, they've got different interests, but ultimately, overall, what unifies them is the desire to remove the Myanmar military from power. They're all unified in the view that the Myanmar military are, well, let's call them what they are, genocidal maniacs. And they want them out of power because they've been bad for Myanmar, they've been bad for civilians.
But also, going back to what Tony was telling us earlier on, one of the significant hurdles that the junta is facing is the fact that so many young men don't want to be part of it anymore. And then I believe many of them are crossing the border into Thailand. Tell us about how that is factoring into the structure, if you like, the state of the junta as it is now.
Well, the junta's always operated on the basis of a large number of poorly trained troops, but a small number of crack troops that they've tended to move around the country as needed. So their leadership have always been concerned about being removed from power themselves. So they've been reluctant to empower too many people within their structure. So what they've done is they've tended to move their quality troops, their battle-hardened troops around the country. Their problem today is that there are conflicts, there are people trying to remove them from power all over the country. So they're stretched very thin. I mean, they're stretched thinner than they've ever been. They've introduced conscription. It's incredibly unpopular within Myanmar. Hundreds of thousands of people have tried to leave the country. There's reports from Mae Sot, Thailand, so near Myawaddy, of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of young men trying to flee the country to avoid conscription. That is a sign that the Myanmar military are desperate for manpower, and it's a sign that they need that manpower, and that they feel that they need that manpower to be able to remain in power. I mean, this is, I think, a fairly pivotal moment in the future of Myanmar. This is a time where the military of the country is at its weakest, probably at its weakest since independence, certainly at its weakest since it first came to political power in the country in 1962. But it's a reflection that the people of Myanmar do not want them in power.
They may be having problems as far as troop numbers are concerned, but of course they are still technically superior, and they're still able to get arms. I believe Russia has supplanted, I think, China as its main source of firepower and equipment and so on. What efforts, if any, can be made to try and cut that line of supply?
Well, as you say, the air superiority is a problem for the resistance. So for a beginning, restrictions on the import of jet fuel, I think, is pretty important and should be a pretty simple thing for the international community to do. I mean, those countries that have talked tough on human rights, the US and others, I think should be very actively ensuring that jet fuel isn't available to the Myanmar military junta, because it simply uses it to fuel the jets that they bomb civilian communities. Russia has replaced China as the country's biggest arms supplier, but China is still a huge arms supplier to the Myanmar military, and there should simply be an arms embargo. I mean, no one should be selling weapons to the Myanmar military. This is an unpopular dictatorship. The people of the country don't want them in power and are resisting them very actively. The junta has shown itself to be incredibly willing to turn its weapons on civilians. I mean, that's what's characterised the time since the coup in 2021, and they simply should not be allowed to purchase more weapons. And that's the role for the UN Security Council. I mean, that's the body that should be making making sure that even if Russia or China wants to sell arms to the Myanmar junta, that they're not able to do that.
It's really good to get your thoughts on this. Ronan Lee, we appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.